Hi, everyone. I'm Amir Mitchell, Account Executive at Government Executive. And today I have the pleasure of moderating today's conversation, incorporating zero trust security models in government. Last year, the President ordered federal agencies to come up with plans to defend the vital institutions that underpin the American way of life. The IT core of this initiative, Zero Trust, moving away from implied trust based on network location and perimeter-based security, and evaluating trust on a per transaction basis. As a result, all federal agencies, and by extension, most of their state, local, and tribal counterparts, need to embrace the framework to ensure their security practices get ahead of new threats. But zero trust may be examined holistically, without the noise found in much of the vendor community. During today's conversation, we are going to explore zero trust from every angle, from infrastructure to landscape, as well as identity, budgets, and of course, integration. We have a lot of information to cover today, so we ask that you please chat any questions that you have in the chat box during the presentation. A representative from the VMware team will get back to you with answers following today's event. I'm excited to be joined by two cybersecurity experts from VMware. Welcome, Chris Betts and Christopher Reed. They both serve as directors and EUC technology strategists on the Tech Pursuit team at VMware. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Well, Reed, I'm going to pass it on to you for the presentation portion of today.
Excellent. So when we have a zero trust conversation, you said it very well. We talked about the executive order that was issued. It's really interesting if you read the executive order, what's actually contained inside, because it says, I'll summarize, make things better. It doesn't necessarily give you concrete ideas over what precisely you're supposed to do, other than mentioning things like, per transaction security. Well, what does that mean exactly? So enter the world of zero trust. Zero trust is largely undefined in the industry. Now, multiple vendors, including the ones we work for, have multiple definitions of zero trust. That being said, as an industry, I'll equate the definition of zero trust to about the same vague roundness of a definition as the term cloud had, 6 to 8 years ago. Everything was a cloud, internal cloud, external cloud, hybrid cloud, I got a cloud, you've got a cloud. That's where we're at today when it comes to zero trust. So how do we have an intelligent conversation about something that is largely undefined, is demanded for you to comply with, and you need to do something now to address it? Well, let's set some boundaries. I think that that's a good place to start. So first off, why this conversation at all? Well, congratulations are in order for all of our watchers and listeners today. Every network's your network. This is the world we live in, and not picking on any one company, but just in the very recent history, just a few of the minor attacks that have been out there, from major to really big deals. It's just not a safe world. And in the work from home environment, zero trust is even more complicated. You used to be able to say things like, this VLAN can trust this VLAN because they're on the same network. Now that your devices are not just on different VLANs, but one's at this person's address and another's at a coffee shop, wow, that gets even more complicated, because I don't own connectivity between the coffee shop and that other person's home network. So how do I manage that? So it demands just a smidge of a history lesson, and I won't go into the depth of it here. We need to understand this concept's not new. It's been around for a while. What is new about zero trust? What's new about zero trust is the ability to tangibly execute upon its principles. Going back to the Jericho Forum, way back in the ancient days of the early 2000s, to John Kindervag and Zero Trust and the work he did at Forrester, to the Carter framework from Google, which eventually turned into the BeyondCorp model. And then I'll just emphasize this, that Zero Trust is not a product. You can't go buy a box of it at the store. You could try, and there are people marketing it that way, buy our X product and you'll have Zero Trust. That's simply not true. If we fast forward into this year, we'll see that the Carter framework, much of this matured into the executive order we've mentioned, which is 14028, into the Zero Trust security model published by CISA, to the DoD document, and of course, the most trusted document on this would be the NIST Article 800-207. So this is how we got here. I'm going to do you a favor. We have read through all of this material. We have combed it. We've had roundtables and discussions. Let's simmer this all down. Yes, I'm from the South. To its most basic ingredients. What does Zero Trust mean? Zero Trust is interacting at the authentication and access layer across the 5 pillars of trust defined in all of those frameworks and documents. Those are device trust, meaning that I have the compliancy, control, and trust that the device should be able to access a network or a resource. The next is network trust. This is the Cotton Eye Joe of trust. The Cotton Eye Joe is where you coming from, where you going. And that is the network piece as well as inspection, all the things that need to happen. And yes, at the home network as well as the coffee shop and in between and all aspects. The third aspect of trust is the workload. This is the workload you're running, whether it's software as a service, and it's simply somebody running it for you, like Outlook or Exchange services, or it's an internal 3-tiered application or a mainframe application, but it's all the security that goes around that workload between the various tiers so that there is no implicit trust saying, well, I just trust you because you're there. I need to trust you because you're there and you can verify that you are and what you say you are. User identity trust is the 4th pillar, and it's specific to verifying that you are who you say you are. This is often done through multi-factor, 2-factor, and that's the way we most commonly see it expressed. But that's not all this is. It also evolves into the role-based access control, the least privilege access type of things, so that not only, oh, look, here comes Chris Reed accessing, but also, and he should only be a junior admin, right? So we understand those things. And last but not least is data trust, which are all the digital loss prevention tools around not just legacy file system unstructured storage, but cloud-based storage and the transport in between to ensure that the data should be trusted. So this is just a bit of primer on the conversation so that when we're talking about these things, we're at least starting to talk the same language and define this more succinctly. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you for setting the stage for us here, Reed. I think that segues us nicely into our conversation, so let's dive in. Reed, could you speak to what you have seen are some of the blockers around implementing Zero Trust?
Yeah, number one blocker on implementing Zero Trust is, but we've always done it this way. So the process and methodology that organizations employ, they have worked very hard on. And to tell somebody that the VPN infrastructure that they've relied on for ages is no longer appropriate or must be changed, improved, or augmented in a zero trust framework is a hard message for some people to hear. I've seen that as a blocker. The other biggest blocker that I see is siloed organizations. If you're going to do zero trust, you're going to have executive sponsorship at the highest levels to work across those different organizations. Those 5 pillars of technology are all owned by different groups and different people. Sometimes they don't even know who each other are, but now I'm asking my workload guys to talk to my network guys, to talk to endpoint management guys, and that can be really difficult. Those are the 2 things I see most often in there. And then I will just mention what I didn't just allude to before I outright said it, is aiming at the same target. Like, okay, we all want zero trust here, but do we all agree on what that is? So what's the context of the conversation? So really those 3 things would be my primary blockers.
Thank you. And that's.
Yeah, I'd say my 3 are pretty much the same. I mean, number one, what I see in industry is that, to Chris Reed's point, is that people have built their careers on some of these technologies, and they've been doing things the same way for the last 20 to 25 years. They've never really gone in and rationalized what security means in a more modern workforce, hence things like zero trust. And they have a really hard time getting out of their way of how they do business today and what it means to modernize or adopt newer security methodologies and practices to achieve things like zero trust. And then really rationalizing those security policies. Although these new mandates and things come out, I don't see organizations truly trying to understand what zero trust means. Which typically drives them to rationalize those security policies that they've been doing for the last 20 to 25 years. So yeah, a lot like Reed had mentioned, I agree with all 3 of those. But the biggest one is just those teams having a really, really hard time getting out of their own way and adopting modern, newer security methodologies.
I'm going to stay with you for a moment now. Can you speak to how I consolidate tools when implementing zero trust, and what can I do tactically to meet my strategic goals?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So what we see in industry is that there's a plethora of tools that are out there to manage our devices, right? You have a set of tools that manage my Windows devices. I have a set of tools that manage my Mac devices. I have another tool set that manages my mobile iOS and Android devices. Set of tools that's maybe managing my Chromebooks. A whole nother set of tools that manage my Linux tools. And if I'm an organization that leverages IoT, it's a whole nother set of tools, right? And then with all of those tools, I have applications associated to those, right? With my Windows devices, I have Windows apps. With my mobility tools, I have SaaS or web-based applications or mobile-based applications. And then I have data assigned to those, right? And the short of it is that we typically see snowflake architectures that manage those individual silos. However, you should start looking at a platform that gets rid of the individual devices and associated applications, and it really starts to manage the user. Because let's face it, right? We typically have one user that uses a number of all those devices, yet we target the device specifically instead of having a platform that implements the same security policy across all of those devices as it pertains to my user.
And Reed?
So, I've got a lot of thoughts around this of where to get started and how to manage your tools consolidation specifically. I think it comes down to a very fundamental question for organizations, and that's best of breed or platform. And many organizations take a best of breed approach. And if I need to do this thing, what's the absolute best product that does X? what I would argue is in this world, and Betts said it very well, and I'm just going to draw attention to this, of managing the user versus managing the device. By that, we don't mean not managing the device. What we really mean is managing the user's experience across all their devices. And for organizations that have taken a very stringent best of breed approach, they're going to have a hard time consolidating, because ultimately you're moving somebody's cheese. But if you're going to achieve zero trust, you must aim towards unified endpoint management. Otherwise, you're going to do zero-ish trust for mobile, zero-ish trust for Windows, zero-ish trust for Mac. I just think those are different things. That to me is what it boils down to. You have to decide as an organization that the goal is enough for the entire team, so that maybe some people have a bit of their own little fiefdom crumbled, or at least redefined. I don't think anything's ever crumbled. Technology moves too fast, but changed is the best way to put it. Does that help? Does it make sense?
It does. And Reed, in terms of implementation, what are my immediate next steps? And can you talk about your recommended implementation methodology?
So I can, first off, everybody's demanded to get something done. Love that. What does that mean? Essentially, the fundamental aspect of zero trust is looking at those 5 pillars and including one of the other 4 in your authentication. So with most customers that I've worked with, what we recommend, now it's not the only entry point, I'll make that very clear, but it's a easier entry point for most, is you already have user identity authentication for your applications. Let's just say it's your Office applications, or maybe your Google suite of applications. You already have that. So you have username and password, which is clearly an identity trust. You might even have multi-factor as part of that, which is great. Now, in order to cross the trust zone of boundaries, what if you could very easily add device compliance to the authentication chain? So all you're saying is check username and password, verify multi-factor. Third, do I and should I trust that device based off of my compliance standards? Now, the industry at large calls this conditional access. We refer to it specifically at VMware as continuous access. Now, I won't get into our product, but there are differences between the two. This is not, we're not trying to get into our products here, but just simply to understand that it is using the device you're accessing from as a condition for being able to access a resource. Simply find one of the other pillars and integrate it into your authentication chain. That's where you get started.
And Betts, I'm going to pivot to you for this one as well.
I'd say, and Chris Reed mentioned this earlier, right? Get all your IT organizations aligned to the same North Star vision and agree to a path, that's inclusive of all those IT organizations. And then what you'll find with that is that that'll establish your path to zero trust, right? So whether it's starting with your device management and compliance and adding the conditional or continuous access that Chris Reed just mentioned, it'll help lay out that path. But I think the most important thing is just having that North Star vision so that everybody's aligned to the same vision and they're not off doing their own zero trust stuff, which never delivers a zero trust journey, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And going off of that, Betts, what have you seen others do as a primary first step?
Yeah, I see. I think coming to the realization that it's a multi-year journey, right? It's not something that you're going to do all at once. You're going to carve off various different steps to get there. But we typically see people start with the things that Reed just mentioned, right? Device management and compliance. Maybe the next step is conditional access. You start to hit some of the network components when it comes to app tunneling and proxying. Getting your arms wrapped around risk and analytics. And then ultimately, how do you automate some of the remediation and orchestration as these things happen? So we're not depending on individuals or manual processes to mitigate some of the risks in the environment. We're having things detect and remediate automatically.
And Reed?
So, starting, of course, with device trust, I think is key. Another good starting point is the network trust side. It's very non-disruptive to add in a secure access service edge. You're simply moving where the network is accessing from. You're removing reliance on legacy things like VPN concentrators, and you have a much more succinct control over the Cotton Eye Joe of trust, which is network trust. And that is another really good place to start. And it gets the trouble down, at least down at the end of the street instead of at your front door from a networking perspective. I think that's another really good place to start.
Thank you. And before we reach the end of our time, I do want to make sure we have a moment to talk about the NIST 800-207, Zero Trust Logical Architecture. Reed, can you talk a bit more about how VMware specifically aligns with this?
Yeah, and I'll show you. We have an overlay map of what we do there. So let me get to that before I share my screen so you don't have to watch me click. But, I'll just say this about the framework. The framework is as good as any other framework. To those who wrote it, they obviously put in a great deal of time and effort. Those who work with it, like any other official text, there is a level of interpretation required in order to properly leverage any framework. So just to be really clear about that, it's not something that I expect people to just, immediately say, oh, okay, this is where VMware applies. Let me go get those products and I'm going to slap all this together. But just so we understand, this is the core zero trust logical components of 800-207. And if we do a bit of an overlay, our unified endpoint management is your command and control system. With the control plane managing your devices, whether mobile or Windows or Mac, etc. Your industry compliance, we have industry compliance templates for that. And for our threat intelligence, we integrate with, of course, our own products such as Carbon Black EDR, as well as VMware's mobile threat defense product. So both mobile and desktop here as well. And then really any other product we integrate into our enterprise data lake, which allows you to provide automations around threat information and automate activities. And then, of course, activity logs, right? Syslogging, who's accessing what, when, where, or how, authenticated access versus unauthenticated, and it has to go to a system of record. So that can be everything from us as a sysvol destination to maybe something you already have as a sysvol destination, as well as incorporating that in the intelligence data lake for action and for your sysvol for later inspection. Then this is really the SASE model of whether I'm just tunneling to a gateway or I'm tunneling into secure access. This is my network policy enforcement. And then, of course, access policies, that is your authentication chain policy, as well as your role-based access control around data and data loss prevention, So some of the software as a service management products that we have. So we have what's it called? SaaS Cloud Apps Management has DLP functionality built into it for data loss, as well as SASE has inline data loss prevention for data that's moving. So catch all the people sharing docs on Gmail, those type of things. Not to catch them, but protect the state. PKI, whether you use ours, PKI is a CA or your own, we broker and control. And then, of course, identity management. We are identity broker. So we don't really care what the identity source is. We just want to broker the authentication and make sure it's working appropriately, whether it's Okta, Ping, Oracle, ID, or many of the other products in that space, Azure AD, traditional AD. And then, of course, being able to do this, UEM access. And I will mention our Intel vPro platform for remote KVM and control, which is a unique integration with us as well. So I'll take a breath. There's a lot of places we integrate. Does this mean you have to use VMware for every piece of this? We would argue you'll be better off, but ultimately the answer to that is no. But we're here and our aim is to give you a place to get started so that you can get some tangible results. So hopefully that's helpful as it relates to the NIST framework. We will include some material from Chris Betts as well that's specific to this and some white papers that you could reference.
Thank you, Reed. And Betts, again, I'm going to pivot to you for this one.
Yep, I would just add that we do have federal teams within VMware that live and breathe these things, right? So as these various different mandates come out, they're in contact with DISTA, they're aligned with the various different NIST mandates. They align a lot of our technologies with the NIST cybersecurity framework, functions 1 through 5. And then when it comes to other federal types of compliance, right, whether it's FedRAMP or various different ISO accreditations, we have teams dedicated to align to these mandates. And to Reed's point, we do have some white papers that you guys will get links to that show how we align specifically with NIST 800-207. And we also have a really good blog site that goes into even more detail on how we align with NIST 800-207.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, any final thoughts you would like to leave our audience with today? Betts, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's to Reed's point earlier, right? Zero trust is a methodology, and if you break down the silos within your various different organizations and align to that North Star vision, the zero trust journey becomes a lot easier, right? So if you do have a security framework or architecture that you're aligning all your IT organizations with, and then you overlay that zero trust methodology to that, just makes it a lot easier, right? And not just from an end user computing perspective, but that'll help you with things that stem from the data center. If you're going through application modernization efforts, really any IT efforts that align with zero trust, it just makes it easier if you've got everybody aligned to the same North Star vision.
And Reed, you of course.
So when talking about security, there is a propensity within organizations to incite fear, especially selling organizations. I'm going to do just the opposite. Take a deep breath. Nobody's got this 100%. Sit down, talk to your teammates, talk to your teams, talk to our federal team. We're here to help. Talk to the government executive group, all of these people, ingest information, get good data, and then make small, tangible steps forward. This is a journey we will all be on for the next many, many years. Rather than incite panic of you must comply with X today, take a measured approach and achieve something. That is my ultimate recommendation. Can we help you do that? Yes. Do we want to? Absolutely. But to that point, it's not a moment to panic. It's a moment to be very poised and move forward with purpose.
Love that. That's unfortunately the end of our conversation, gentlemen. Thank you for the great discussion. Also, thanks to our audience for tuning in to this special program, Incorporating Zero Trust Security Models in Government. If you missed part of the show or want to share it with your colleagues, the on-demand program will be available shortly and shared via email. For GovExec, I'm Amir Mitchell. We'll see you next time. So it looks like we still have some time in today's programming for some Q&A from the audience. Please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A box. But our first question that we have here is from Robert Vitelli. Zero trust is more of a model or philosophy and not necessarily a framework, correct?
Yeah, I would say that that's a correct statement. What we find is a lot of security architectures, and when organizations are building out their security frameworks, they're adopting zero trust methodologies. So that's spot on. Zero trust is a model or a philosophy that people build their own frameworks around.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. We have a second question from Alyssa Perry. Has Zero Trust been incorporated into NIST 853? If not, should it be?
So I do think it should be. Ultimately, like all frameworks, they're scaffolding. They're scaffolding for ideas and creation. So you can think of them as a skeleton to achieve something. That's the same with 853. Now, I know we use that specifically for auditing, identity, protect, detect, respond, recover, and it's a lot of those core functions. Zero trust, of course, is first an idea, a philosophy, fleshed out in a framework of how you're going to achieve it and achieve each piece across the 5 pillars of trust. That ultimately needs to be defined. I think we're too early to completely codify everything about it, but the concept and ideas do need to be represented. Hopefully that is represented. And if it's not 853 in another document, I do know 800-207 tends to be the primary reference document relating to this.
Thank you. And to conclude our Q&A, how can governments and industry collaborate to further zero trust development and principles?
So I'll start and then hand it over to Chris Betts and see what he has to think. So government agencies tend to be very siloed by the nature of what they do. To that point, whether state, local, federal, there tend to be multiple agencies. There's some level of, you can say, distrust between agencies, central departments of ITs versus agency IT. I think you need to erode those barriers and share ideas. You may achieve similar things in different ways, and I think that's okay. But if you're not having the conversations, then you're definitely not going to get there. So my recommendation is to begin the process, start the journey, understand the methodology and thought process, which hopefully today we've been able to communicate, and then, start small and begin to take some concrete steps forward. And if you do something and you get 6 months down the road and realize, yeah, that's not what we wanted, or it's not working the way we expected, it's okay, unwind that. I think we need to have a little bit of humility as we approach this, and just, the ability to take a step back So, Beth, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think you said a key term there, right? Take it step by step. Because what I personally find when having these conversations with government organizations is that, you know, they'll complain about their own bureaucracies and how, you know, they've really operated in the same framework for the last 30 years. And when they look at, you know, the task at hand of rationalizing those security policies, adopting a zero trust architecture, it's complicated, right? And you just see a lot of people kind of give up and they don't know where else to turn. So I agree. I think you take it step by step, lean into industry for advice and guidance. What you'll find is a lot of industry want to step in and be a trusted advisor and a strategic partner to help government agencies adopt zero trust methodology. So you hit it spot on, Chris.
And gentlemen, I apologize. I have one more question from Robert Vitelli. I know with certain SaaS solutions, you can eliminate the need for a lot of other best of breed products and would simplify the environment. However, does that not also introduce a single point of failure if that SaaS provider were to be taken down? What would be the solution or recommendation so there is no single point of failure?
I think it's important to understand SASE. And the nature of SASE is specifically that it is software or something as a service. To that point, in the exact same fashion that cloud is software as a service, the reliance, uptime, and ability of that service is related to the provider you choose. Hence, the responsibility of it being a single point of failure is also pinned on that provider. Therefore, understanding SLAs, understanding capabilities, and architecting so that you don't have individual points of failure, like maybe just one virtual appliance for the edge versus multiple virtual appliances now, or physical appliances, and multiple points of entry with different routing rules and integration with, you know, border gateway protocol, and those type of things are all very important in architecting that solution. You could certainly architect a single point of failure, and a lot of solutions will let you do that. However, since it is software as a service, the onus of uptime is transferred to the provider, and that needs to be understood by the entirety of your organization. Anything you do in cloud services or software as a service faces that risk, and the transference of risk from you to a provider is specifically predicated upon the organization's ability to accept that.
Thank you again. Lastly, I want to thank VMware for their participation, and a special thanks to our audience for joining us today. For GovExec, I'm Amir Mitchell.